Welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, Regional Conservation Partnership Program Alternative Funding Arrangement. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. Please note that all connections are muted at this time. Questions will be taken during the Q&A portion, and you can submit your question via the chat by selecting All Panelists. If you require technical assistance, please send the chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the call over to Kari Cohen. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody, or potentially good morning if you're way out west. This is Kari Cohen here with NRCS. I'm the project's branch chief. My team is responsible for national management and administration of the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Hope everyone is doing well out there during this time of the COVID crisis. I'm coming at you from my basement with my cat sitting next to me, so I'm doing about as well as one could. We're going to talk today about this exciting opportunity within RCPP called our Alternative Funding Arrangements. We colloquially call it the AFA provision, and I'll probably use that a lot more often today than spelling out the entire name. We have a lot of folks on the line, which I'm really excited about. This is the first time that we've done a separate funding announcement for the AFA provision, and I'm going to walk you through the funding announcement, which is on the street right now, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end to get into some questions and answers. This whole session is going to be recorded and posted on the RCPP website. We will also eventually put up a FAQ document with your questions and our answers just as soon as we can, so that everyone has equal access to that. So, without further ado, see if we can get started. Okay, so for those of you familiar with RCPP, this may be redundant, but let's start at the beginning. The Regional Conservation Partnership Program truly is a public-private partnership program between NRCS and partners where we co-invest in targeted, innovative natural resource solutions. So partners apply to the program. NRCS provides funding to those partners, and we are working on natural resource concerns in geographic areas that are of mutual interest to both NRCS and our partners. What is an alternative funding arrangement? So AFAs were actually included in the first iteration of RCPP in the 2014 Farm Bill. We have 4 AFA projects that are existing from that first Farm Bill, but the AFA provision was really expanded and clarified in the 2018 Farm Bill, and it provides for alternative project structures compared to what we now call RCPP Classic. That's sort of the traditional RCPP program, which uses really NRCS's traditional program approach to expend most of its dollars. I'm going to give you a visual about how the AFA provision differs from RCPP Classic, just so everyone's clear. Here in RCPP Classic, and we're about to announce the first awards under the new Farm Bill for RCPP Classic. We provide funding to an RCPP project under RCPP Classic. We have both FA, which is financial assistance. Those are dollars that are going out for conservation on the ground. As you can see here, some of that FA will flow through NRCS state offices and down to producers and landowners through traditional sort of NRCS contracts or easements. We could provide FA directly to partners or sponsors for watershed public works type projects or entity-held easements. And then we also have technical assistance. NRCS can provide technical assistance through these RCPP Classic projects directly to producers. There's also the possibility that partners can provide technical assistance. So funding flows in lots of different ways through RCPP Classic projects. The bulk of it is going to flow out, as you are looking at the slide to the left, through our state offices, through our contracts and easements. Let's contrast that with our AFA approach. If I can get the slide to go. There we go. Here we have a much more simplified approach where we are providing funding to an RCPP project. That funding is going to flow directly to a lead partner, whoever applies to the program. And that lead partner, in turn, is going to take responsibility for dispensing both financial assistance, whether that's easements or contracts or watershed-type projects, and also technical assistance. And they're going to dispense these things directly to participating producers, landowners, partners, and contractors. So you can see here that there are no contracts between NRCS and landowners. There's no easements. There's no watershed contracts between us and a sponsor. It's all flowing through this lead partner. You'll see out there on the left side of your slide, there are some inherently governmental activities that NRCS is still required to do, and we'll talk about that. So NRCS is going to retain a little bit of technical assistance funding for each of these AFA projects. Okay, I'm going to have to drink a little water as we go along here. So let's talk a little bit about the basics of this funding announcement that is currently open. We have up to $50 million available, that's 50, and we have the statutory restriction that caps us at providing no more than 15 awards in any given year through the AFA provision. So we can only fund up to 15 projects this year with that $50 million. Okay, an important thing to understand, and if you read through the funding announcement, you'll see that there are many RCPP requirements that are the same both for RCPP Classic and for the AFA provision. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through details on some of these. If you read through the RCPP Classic funding announcement, which accidentally disappeared off of our website and we're going to put back up so people can use it as a reference, it goes into a lot more detail about the CCAs, state multi-state pools. That's actually in the AFA funding announcement as well. The AFA funding announcement also goes into great detail about the 70-30 FATA split, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're going to focus today on some of the real key provisions for the AFA funding announcement. So, as I was saying, just like for RCPP Classic, the funding that we disperse here and expend through the AFA provision has to be split. 50% of it has to be spent in the critical conservation areas and 50% through the state multi-state pool. Every project must identify the conservation benefits and resource concerns that it is planning to address and generate. Partner contributions are still critical, and I'll get to that in a minute. Our goal, again, just like for RCPP Classic, is that partners will contribute at least as much as NRCS is providing in funding. The funding minimum, $250,000 per award, and the maximum $10 million are the same. Every project is going to expend 70% of its funding through financial assistance and 30% through technical assistance. There is an option in the AFA to flex on that a little bit, and there's details on that in the funding announcement. But by and large, most projects will have this 70-30 split. And the eligible lead partners are the same, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Also the same are the RCPP principles. These have not changed from RCPP Classic. These are the program principles. We're looking to fund projects that have real serious impact on the landscape, there's a compelling need and a compelling story behind all these projects. Again, partner contributions, really critical. Innovation. The nice thing about the AFA provision is that innovation is kind of baked into the cake here, as we'll talk about in a minute. And then partnership and project management, very critical for AFA projects, and we'll talk about that a little bit here as well. Okay, so to dig into a little bit about the details about AFAs, it's really designed for projects that are first innovative and do not necessarily rely on our existing program operations. We talked a little bit about that already. Two, that for whatever reason cannot effectively be carried out using the RCPP Classic approach. You will see as you go in to apply for an AFA project that you have to describe for us why you're applying for AFAs and not for RCPP Classic. What is it about your project that cannot be done through the RCPP Classic approach? Also, the AFA is designed for projects that can entirely be managed and implemented by the lead partner, often in collaboration with other partners. Again, with the exception of some of those inherently governmental activities. So it makes it much more like a grant, even though we're not calling it a grant, and the reasons why we're not are described in detail in the funding announcement. We are calling it the AFA provision. Next, there's a whole bunch of text on the next two slides, which I don't like to do, but wanted to be clear that the statute for RCPP really points to some project types that might be good fits for the AFA provision, including projects that are making infrastructure investments, projects that are addressing natural resource concerns through targeted coordination with producers, including watershed planning. The funding announcement makes clear this is not a watershed planning program, but if watershed planning is a part of your project, then that could fit into here. Partners looking to use sophisticated targeting tools, always a welcome element of these projects. Also, the statute makes clear that we are looking to leverage our NRCS investments with private financial mechanisms. These things could include pay for performance, pay for success type approaches. You know, currently the way NRCS generally works is we pay for the value of an easement that's been appraised. We pay for conservation practices that have been implemented. We don't currently have a mechanism to pay for the amount of carbon that's sequestered in the ground or in trees, or the amount of nitrogen that has been prevented from running off a farm field. There are lots of pay for performance and pay for success approaches that people are developing that may be a good fit under the AFA provision. Also environmental markets, which often rely on a pay for performance type approach. This last bullet is really a catch-all, and this is mentioned in the statute. There may be other things that aren't included in these three bullets that folks may be thinking of and interested in trying to carry out that don't fit under those other three bullets. So it's kind of a catch-all there. Just going to take a sip of water. Those inherently governmental responsibilities that NRCS must retain at a minimum. First of all, every producer / landowner who's going to be participating in these projects, even though they aren't going to be contracting directly with NRCS, they have to be in compliance with the highly erodible lands and wetlands compliance provisions of the Farm Bill. They have to meet AGI, the adjusted gross income limitation, although folks can apply for a waiver for that. And so, NRCS must, make sure that those producers, before anybody receives a payment from a partner, is in compliance with those things. In addition, we have National Environmental Policy Act, National Historic Preservation Act, and Endangered Species Act responsibilities. We have to be putting things on the ground that are consistent with those acts, and it is our job to make sure of that. And then, of course, we're going to manage the partnership agreement on the NRCS side and any supplemental agreements that are a part of the agreement. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So to do those things, we're going to retain 5% of the overall funding request to carry out these activities. This is the same as we do for RCPP Classic projects. I put this slide in here just quickly to review the eligible partners that can be awarded an RCPP project. This is no different than RCPP Classic, and this comes straight out of the statute. So just make sure if you are applying that you are represented here on this list. The authorized lands, I didn't mention this earlier, but these are the same as for all other RCPP elements. These projects must be take place on private agricultural lands and non-industrial private forest land. We often get a question about public lands. Public lands, can be a part of these projects so long as the benefits of the project, even if, there's activities being carried out on public lands, directly accrue to private lands. And a good example is a watershed structure. If someone's building a water supply structure or something like that, the benefits from that structure have to accrue to private lands for it to count as an RCPP project. Okay. So what are authorized activities under the AFA provision? If you're familiar with RCPP Classic, some of these will look familiar. We can do land management type activities. These are things that may look like EQIP type activities or CSP activities if you're familiar with those other NRCS Farm Bill programs. We have land rental authority for RCPP, which is CRP Conservation Reserve Program like. Just like for RCPP Classic, we're looking at doing more targeted short-term land rentals here, not longer 10-year type rentals, especially given that these projects can only last 5 years. Entity-held easements, and then watershed public works type activities. You'll note here that U.S. held easements, which are available under RCPP Classic, are not available under AFA projects. Again, these are entity-led, partner-led projects. There really is no space in the AFA provision for U.S. held easements. Let's dig a little bit into these entity-held easements in the AFA provision. They have to be tied to proposed conservation benefits. Just like for RCPP Classic, there's flexibility in land use. So an AFA easement could be put on forest land, it could be put on cropland, it could be put on wetlands, it could be put on riparian areas. It's got to be tied, however, to the proposed conservation benefits in the project. NRCS is currently developing what we call minimum deed requirements for AFA easements. This is different than anything we have for RCPP Classic, where we are developing a template deed for the U.S. held easements and minimum deed terms for entity held easements. Here we're going to have minimum deed requirements, which is basically going to say, if you're an entity out there with an AFA project, we're not going to dictate the terms of your easement. However, your easement must address A, B, C, D, these things for us to go ahead and provide funding for your easement. If your project is going to be carrying out easements through a more traditional easement approach, you have to be clear. We want to be clear with everyone. This is not a way to get around RCPP Classic and our compensation caps and easement valuation approach there in RCPP Classic. If you have an innovative, way to go about, doing conservation easements with landowners, that's fine. We'll take a look at that through your proposal. But if you're doing a traditional sort of easement approach, you can't vary from those RCPP Classic compensation caps or valuations. Our leadership made very clear we don't want these two elements competing against each other. Let's talk a little bit about the land management type activities. These are, things you're going to put on the ground with producers that are EQIP or CSP-like. Again, if land management activities are consistent with implementation of the types of things that NRCS does through its conservation practice standards, things will be pretty straightforward. If you have deviations that you want to do from our practice standards, it's possible that we could address those deviations through new payment scenarios or policy flexibilities. All those things are things we'll consider through your proposals. If there are substantial deviations, and we'll get more into this in a little bit, there may be more additional environmental compliance analysis required, and I'll go into that in more detail in a subsequent slide. But the key thing here that you'll want to do is talk early and often with your state RCPP coordinator in the state in which you're planning to carry out this activity or this project. If it's more than one state, you're going to want to talk to all those coordinators. The state coordinator is a very key person because all these projects are going to be managed and administered at the state level. They're going to need to support the types of innovations and types of activities that you're planning to do in your project. Again, I mentioned a little bit earlier these three statutes that we have to make sure that these projects are consistent with: NEPA, NHPA, and the Endangered Species Act. A little bit more detail on what I was just talking about. really the two things to consider here as critical when you're thinking about NEPA and NHPA and Endangered Species Act are the land management and also watershed type activities, these public work structures. As I mentioned, if your activities fall under traditional NRCS practice standards, that's business as usual. And I'll give you an example. Your project may be proposing an innovative pay for success or pay for performance approach where you're going to pay a landowner instead of paying them to implement a practice, you're going to pay them for how much carbon they're sequestering. As long as that producer is still implementing whatever they're putting on the ground is still consistent with an NRCS conservation practice standard, really not going to have a problem with NEPA as long as there's no historical or cultural resources. NHPA is fine. And then you, of course, have to think about Endangered Species Act. Same with our watershed structures. If you're going to follow our traditional PL 566 process, probably no problem. If not, if you're trying to deviate from our NRCS practice standards, if you're trying to do something innovative that we don't currently have a practice standard for, if for some reason you're trying to deviate from our traditional PL 566 process, you're going to have to detail in your proposal how you're going to satisfy our NEPA responsibilities because we're not going to put something on the ground unless we are comfortable that we are in good shape with NEPA, NHPA, and Endangered Species Act. If there are additional responsibilities, if you have to end up doing an environmental analysis or an environmental impact statement, those activities are going to come at the expense and duty of the lead partner. Of course, NRCS will be in touch with you and will ultimately have to sign off on any EA or EIS that you develop, but the responsibility for developing those documents is going to be on the lead partner. And also, you really need to take those, if you need to do something like that, you need to take that into account when you're writing in your project milestones and your timeline. Okay, let's talk a little bit about project outcomes. Just like for RCPP Classic, all of our AFA projects have to report on the conservation outcomes of their projects. So if you look here all the way on the left side, this was written for the RCPP Classic, so you'll see RCPP contracts in there. But effectively, historically for RCPP, what we've always had our partners report on is kind of this big circle in the middle, the outputs of our projects, which is how many, acres of cover crops did you put on the ground, how many riparian buffers, how many public work structures, the outputs of the project. Moving forward with these new RCPP projects, our partners have to report on the conservation or environmental outcomes. So what was the environmental or conservation result of those program outputs? And then to the extent possible, we're also asking our partners to report on the economic outcomes and the social outcomes of their projects as well. So all RCP projects, whether you're an AFA project or a Classic, you must develop an approach to report on the environmental outcomes, and we ask that question in the proposal questionnaire. Again, economic and social outcome reporting is optional. And your state coordinator, as well as NRCS headquarters staff, we're going to be working with our RCPP awardees to develop your approach to data collection and outcomes reporting. So if everybody isn't confused yet, that's good. But if you are confused, here's a couple slides to talk about from nuts, A to Z, soup to nuts, kind of how would an AFA work. Okay, so folks are going to apply to the program. We'll talk about how we're going to evaluate those proposals in a little bit. But then we're going to select projects for award, and we're going to negotiate the details of your project with you. And then we're going to execute what we call a partnership agreement. Again, the lead partner, that partner that is signing this agreement with NRCS, is going to be the one that's responsible for the project deliverables, delivering the project, the partner contributions, and reporting on the outcomes for each of these projects. We are going to use what we call supplemental agreements to obligate funding to the lead partner. So let's say you have a $4 million project. In the simplest of terms and simplest of projects, we will enter into a $4 million supplemental agreement with the lead partner. The partnership agreement, the very first thing you sign, actually doesn't have any funding associated with it. This is also true for RCPP Classic. It just kind of lays out how the project's going to go, what activities are going to take place in the project. The supplemental agreement is actually where we obligate funding, and we're doing this so that we have flexibility in the way that we provide funding to our partners. The lead partner is going to go out and do conservation activities, whether they're easements, on-the-ground land management activities, watershed activities. And then they're going to come to us and say, hey, look at all the good things we did. Prove to us that they spent the money, and look at all the good stuff we put on the ground. And once we, of course, we're going to negotiate with you up front, the documentation that we're going to require to be able to reimburse you. But then we will reimburse the lead partner for the conservation activities that they have carried out. Lead partners may subcontract with other partners. Let's say the lead partner wants another entity to do the technical assistance, or they want to, there's a land trust, they want to actually hold the conservation easements that they're going to put into place. That's certainly an option. There's also the option for NRCS to directly enter into supplemental agreements with other partners and not just the lead partner. That is not our preference. We would prefer to just work with the lead partner, but we have flexibility to move money through these different avenues. So just wanted to make clear, this is kind of the flow of how this thing is going to work. Didn't put in here at the end of the project, of course, the partner has to be reporting on outcomes and take care of all of its reporting requirements as well. Okay, a couple more slides and then we'll get into the Q&A. Two very critical things for those of you on the phone who are interested maybe in applying for this provision. We are prioritizing, and this is clear in the funding announcement, projects for which the partners are able to carry out all of the FA and TA activities, minus those inherently governmental items. We do leave a little bit of space in the funding announcement for lead partners in their proposal to say, we actually want NRCS to do technical assistance for these activities on our project. We put that in there because the statute sort of outlines that NRCS is to provide technical assistance for these projects. We are going to do it through these inherently governmental items. Again, our preference is that this is entirely a partner-led and partner-managed effort, and we are going to prioritize those projects. And you can see that in the evaluation criteria for the provision. Second, and kind of a corollary to that, is that partners must have access to producer networks and have the capability to provide funding to producers or landowners. So this is not like a normal RCPP Classic project where we can have landowners walk into NRCS office and they can end up working on or being a part of an RCPP project without interacting necessarily with an RCPP lead partner. It's quite possible that in certain circumstances, NRCS could end up recommending producers to participate in the project, but partners really need to have access to find producers or landowners to participate in their projects. And then they have to have some way to provide funding, whether they develop a contract with the participating producer or something like that. You got to figure out a way to provide that funding to the landowner, to the producer, because it's not going to be NRCS that's providing that funding. A little bit about the evaluation process. There is going to be a national review team for AFA proposals. So we're going to review them at the national level. And then every state in which activities are proposed to be carried out will also review proposals. So if you have a project that's going to be carried out in Indiana and Illinois, both of those states will review your project in addition to the national review team. Okay, how to apply. The deadline is 11:59 p.m. on May 18th, 2020. So we've got not quite the full 60 days left, but a good chunk of time left here. You really must, again, and this is in the funding announcement, talk to your state RCPP coordinator early and often. Getting that state buy-in is really important. They're going to be evaluating your project. They'll help you understand how this project may work within an RCPP context. really important. Also, review the RCPP AFA proposal guide. That's on the RCPP website. We have a how to apply page, and you'll find it there. It kind of walks you through the portal, which is where you're going to apply for these projects or these proposals, and that guide will kind of walk you through exactly what all those different things in the portal mean. If you do not have level 2 e-authentication permissions, you have to do that today. I would apply for e-auth as soon as you can, because you cannot get into the RCPP portal to apply unless you have level 2 e-auth. So you got to do that right now. I don't know if things have slowed down with the e-auth process because of the COVID crisis, but I definitely recommend folks get in there. And if you don't have those permissions, apply today. I didn't put on there. I think I left off. The last thing you want to do is go to the RCPP portal. The link is in the funding announcement. That is where you will apply for the project. And again, that proposal guide will help you navigate through the portal. Again, state RCPP coordinators, the list of coordinators, as current as we have it, is on that how to apply webpage for RCPP. And then we also have here the RCPP national inbox. You can always ask questions of national staff. That inbox is always staffed every day. I wouldn't say 24 hours a day, but there's someone in that inbox every day, and we'll get to your question just as soon as we can. Okay, I think those were the highlights of the AFA provision. Again, really excited to do this really for the first time, have a standalone alternative funding arrangement, funding announcement to really push the envelope on conservation and get some really innovative, interesting ideas into the program. So I think Russell is going to moderate, Russell Ames, who's on the RCPP staff, he's going to moderate our questions here today. So Russell, do we have questions in the chat box? Certainly encourage folks to enter questions into the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We've got about 25 minutes here left. And again, we'll try to pull all this together into an FAQ document that we will post on the RCPP website. Russell, take it away.
Perfect. I just want to start off by mentioning for folks who joined the audio late when we hit our cap, this was recorded and we post on the RCP website. It usually takes about a week to get the recording and then sometimes a little bit longer to get on the website. But we're also going to create a written FAQ of what we've received. So if we don't get to your question now, it will get posted on the website or we'll reach out to you. So the first question we have, does NRCS envision an AFA or grant proposal to layer on top of an existing classic proposal already?
Read that once again, Russell.
Does NRCS envision that an AFA or grant proposal would have to layer on top of an existing RCPP classic project?
No, the answer to that is no. You know, these AFA projects, the way we envision them certainly are as standalone projects. There's no need. You know, I hadn't even thought about that. I guess there could be a reason to sort of have a project that would complement something that's happening under RCPP Classic. The thing to think about, though, is we're well oversubscribed for RCPP. We have many more proposals than we have funding available, and that's across whether it's RCPP renewals, the Classic provision, or AFAs. It's unlikely that we would fund, you know, two projects working in the same area on the same thing, even if one's an AFA and one's a Classic. You know, we just want to be a little bit understanding that with money in such high demand, we're going to want to, you know, spread it around to different places and different natural resource challenges. So, like, for example, if someone's getting a Classic award here in April when we announced the first set of Classic awards under the new Farm Bill, I would be shocked if we turned around and gave an AFA award for in the same geographic area for the same natural resource challenges, even if it's you know, using a different program structure through the AFA provision.
Okay, the second question, does all implementation work have to be done to NRCS standards, for example, manure storage?
Again, I hopefully got into some of this before. If you're planning to develop a manure storage facility that does not meet NRCS conservation practice standards, you're going to have to tell us how you plan to meet the NEPA, requirements that NRCS has. The reason why this is critical is because we are able to do a very streamlined NEPA process for whenever we implement our conservation practice standards with producers. And that's because we have categorical exclusions that allow us to do that. We can do these environmental evaluations. It's basically a single form. If everything is, according to, implemented according to our conservation practice standards and specs, very streamlined approach. If you're not going to use our conservation practice standards, if you're doing something innovative or outside our standards and specs, we have to figure out how you're going to meet NEPA. And that may require an environmental analysis or, in worst case scenario, an environmental impact statement. And so, again, you just need to, we're not opposed to, going outside of our practice standards, but you have to tell us how we, you as a partnership intend to help us sign off on these things from a NEPA perspective.
Okay, the third question is the major difference between AFA and Classic the level of FA that the partner executes?
There's lots of differences between the two provisions. Again, the big difference to me is the structure of the program. RCPP Classic, most of the funding flows through NRCS into producer contracts and easements. Here for AFAs, it flows through the lead partner. And again, these AFAs, the whole idea is these are projects that can't be done for whatever reason through RCPP Classic. That's because we don't have a current structure to pay for things the way you guys want to pay for it through an AFA project, or it just isn't, you can't do it effectively through our regular program processes. We've heard from people, for example, that say, well, the way NRCS does these application periods and batching of contracts and applications, it just doesn't line up with the way that we want to work with producers. Well, okay, fine. That may be a valid reason to come in with the AFA provision so that the partner can entirely control how it interacts with producers and sign producers up for these activities they want to carry out.
Perfect. And the next question is, can there be advanced payments rather than reimbursement?
I didn't mention this, but there certainly is the opportunity for partners to receive AFA funding through advanced payments rather than reimbursements. I will say that advanced payments, the agency has really become much stricter on advanced payments because it's really put the agency at risk with regard to our financial audit. And so how advanced payments work is that we will not provide funding for more than the partner can expend in the 30 days after they get the payment. So let's say you're asking for $30,000, and when we give you the payment, let's say on April 1st for $30,000, you have 30 days to spend that $30,000. So you need to be very clear, we're trying to be very transparent that partners can only ask for what they can spend in the next 30 days. And then at the end of the 30 days, we are going to come knocking on your door. More likely, we'll be sending you an email saying you have to liquidate this advance. And what that means is you need to send in receipts, other documentation that shows how you spent that $30,000 because we're very strict on these advances because of the risk they provide to the agency. So, yes, there is the opportunity to get advances. Just want to be transparent with our partners that it's a little bit different process than for reimbursements.
Okay, the next question is, are state agencies eligible lead partners and or project partners?
Yes. Next question.
Are partners eligible to receive indirect costs?
Are partners eligible to receive indirect costs? So the answer to that is no. If you look at the funding announcement, and this is actually in the statute, RCPP statute, we are not allowed to pay what the statute calls administrative expenses that we have not translated, but we have determined that administrative costs means indirect costs. So we cannot pay the indirect costs of a lead partner on an RCPP project. Now, it's possible if you are subcontracting with a contractor and they have administrative costs, those administrative costs can be paid because otherwise work really wouldn't probably get done out there. So that's a policy decision we've had made for RCPP long ago, that when a partner is subcontracting with an entity, that entity's indirect costs can be paid, but the lead partner cannot receive any indirect costs. However, your indirect costs that you can't be paid for, what we call the unrecovered indirect costs, you may count those as part of your partner contributions. Next question, Russell.
Next is, here's another easy one. Can match come from the U.S. Forest Service?
Great question. So we really call it here, for RCPP, and this is in the funding announcement, there's detail about this. There's different ways to look at what we call match and partner contribution. We refer to partner contribution as the overall project level contribution that the lead partner in this case and or other partners, contributing partners, are going to provide, and that's what we're looking to have as a 1-to-1 ratio at least with NRCS funding. When we get into match, we're really looking at sort of easement level discussion because match means something in the world of easements. I think what this question is talking about is partner contribution. We cannot count any USDA agency funding as partner contribution for an RCPP project. Any non-USDA federal agency, we can count funding as partner contribution as long as that funding is being expended in the project area for the same conservation benefits and purposes and goals as the RCPP project. So if you have BLM money, you have Fish and Wildlife Service money, DOD money, EPA funding, again, as long as it's in the same project area, being expended on the same purposes and goals and conservation benefits, it can count. USDA agencies, no go.
This is about an example of an innovative project or projects with resulting bioproducts that generate new participant or producer revenues considered innovative.
If someone has a question about a particular project like that or particular idea, please let's not litigate this in front of everybody. You can talk to your RCPP coordinator or again email the national RCPP inbox, and we can talk about it on a one-to-one basis.
One person asked for an example of something that can be done with an alternative funding arrangement that couldn't be done with RCPP Classic.
I gave an example earlier of a pay-for-success project where, again, NRCS doesn't have the capability right now, or the authority, I should say, to pay for pounds of nitrogen, kept from running into a local stream, or the tons of carbon that are sequestered in a tree or in a forest. So that's certainly one example. Infrastructure investments is another project type that is in the statute. We know there are, for example, irrigation districts out west that are interested in doing irrigation upgrades, more efficient irrigation technologies. They know that the producers that they want to work with, they know that the technology and know how to install it. They don't really need NRCS's technical assistance or our financial assistance mechanisms. They can go out and do those things and do it more effectively and efficiently than NRCS could through our regular RCPP Classic approach. So that's just a couple examples. I'm sure you guys have lots of other ideas out there.
The next question is regarding reimbursements. How long does NRCS anticipate the lead partners would have to float project costs until NRCS approves reimbursement and disperses funds?
We haven't really developed guidance on that yet, but generally speaking, you're going to work directly with your state office there, wherever your project is carried out. There'll just be a handful of projects, 1, 2, 3, that state is handling from an RCPP perspective. Our hope is that once the paperwork is submitted for reimbursement, it won't take very long for that partner to get reimbursed. And you'll just have to work out, if you're selected for a project, you can work out with your state how often you would submit reimbursements, whether it's monthly or quarterly or what have you.
Let's see. Try and just work through stuff that's not very project. Do project partners need to be technical service providers?
Do project partners need to be technical service providers? A technical service provider, for those who don't know, is a designation here at NRCS where we certify folks to provide technical assistance to producers and landowners. The answer to that is no. Partners providing technical assistance don't have to be technical service providers. Technical service providers are excellent providers of technical assistance, so we certainly encourage our league partners to, engage with TSPs, as we call them, if they're looking for someone to provide technical assistance on their projects, but it's not a requirement. However, I will say that as part of your proposal, again, because we're expecting our partners to entirely provide the TA for these projects, the technical assistance, you need to provide evidence that you have the capacity, or the partners that are part of the project have the capacity and the capability to do that technical assistance. TSPs have already been certified. We know that they have the capacity and capability. So that's, again, a good avenue to go if you're looking for folks to provide TA.
Okay. The next question, are land rental or land management activities only eligible through FA, or will they also be available through RCPP Classic?
So, yes. Land rental, land management, all the land management all the activity types that I mentioned for AFA provision, land management, land rental, entity held easements, watersheds are all available in the RCPP Classic, in addition to U.S. held easements, which are not available for the AFA provision. Hey, Russell, I just happened to glance at the chat box here, and I saw a good question that I didn't mention. There's a question here about producer privacy. So, under normal, NRCS interactions with producers, NRCS abides by what we call the Section 1619 privacy requirements of the Farm Bill, which means that we cannot share producer information, proprietary business information, their address, their name, what their, anything about the activities that we're doing with them. This is a little bit interesting for these AFA projects where it's actually the partner that's engaging with the producers and landowners. And I didn't mention this, but more than likely the partner is going to have to report to NRCS which landowners and producers got funding under these AFA projects. So there are some privacy things to think about here, and we're working through some of that. Suffice to say that every AFA partner may end up signing what we call a 1619 cooperator agreement, which allows them to have access to producer information, allows for the free flow of producer information between NRCS and the lead partner. But we'll get more guidance on that when, if and when folks get an AFA award. Next question, Russell. We've got about 8 minutes.
Sure. I'm not sure if we have an answer to this, but someone asked, given that there's some difficulty in getting e-auth at this time, and that some offices are harder to reach, does NRCS anticipate extending the deadline for applications given the COVID crisis?
That's a great question. We have been hearing from partners with a steady drumbeat, not just on RCPP, but for conservation innovation grants, where we also have a funding opportunity open right now. We are taking all of that into account. It's still a little bit early in the proposal period. We've been in touch with leadership about our options, but we haven't made any decisions at this time. Please just stay tuned to the RCPP website, the NRCS website. If we do end up extending the deadline beyond May 18th, we'll certainly post it as far and wide as we can.
Okay, next, someone asks, is there a consolidated list of state coordinators?
Yes, the state coordinator list is on the RCPP website on the How to Apply page. So if you go to the main RCPP site, you click on how to apply on the left side of the page. It'll take you to a page where we have listed not just the list of coordinators, but also the funding announcement itself, as well as that proposal guide that I mentioned earlier that will help you navigate the RCPP portal.
Thanks, Kari. Another question. Would there be a minimum for the contracts between lead partners and the producers?
The answer to that is no. A minimum funding amount, Russell, is that how you interpret that?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know that we would do that. NRCS doesn't have a minimum funding amount. I don't think there's any reason to put a floor or a ceiling on the amount of funding that a producer can get. Now, there may be, under RCPP Classic, we are looking at having contract caps because we often have contract caps within our other Farm Bill programs. Can you have an AFA, project where a single producer is getting a $4 million contract? Well, that's a good question. If it's an easement, that's one thing. If it's, they're putting in a $4 million manure storage facility, we got to think about that. So, stay tuned. We haven't built out all the policy. We're working on things like that right now, not just for the AFA provision, but for RCPP Classic as well.
This is sort of an amalgamation of a few questions, but a few folks asked, how is the lead state determined for multi-state projects, and is that determined or submitted as part of the proposal?
Russell, tell us how it works in the portal, please.
So the partners will select what is their lead state as part of the proposal, and the lead state should be the state where the largest share of the work will be done. So if you're working in multiple states, whatever the state has the highest request combined FA and TA of the states included in your proposal.
And that lead state is going to be responsible for managing the project, managing the reimbursements. And so we're asking all of our partners to select the lead states for the project. All right, Russell, we got time for a few more, and then my throat is about to give up, so let's see what we can do.
Here's another short one. Do you anticipate a similar funding announcement for ASA for next year?
That's a great question. We anticipate doing an AFA provision funding announcement in future years. Leadership has certainly supported doing this first one. Our Congress made clear that they anticipate or expect NRCS to provide these AFA awards, and so that is our plan. Of course, an asteroid could strike, and we would deviate from that plan, but that is kind of what we have planned for the moment.
Another question is whether AGI applies to producers and whether or not they need to be individually awarded to each producer that requires an AGI waiver. Yes, so we do not allow in RCPP across the whole program sort of project-level AGI waivers. If partners working with a producer that exceeds the AGI, they're going to have to come in for individual, request individual and separate AGI waivers for each producer that is over the AGI limit. Another question, are NEPA, NHPA, and EHA inherently governmental items? So as I mentioned earlier, what I meant by that, by inherently governmental, is that we have to, NRCS is the only entity that can sign off on NEPA, NHPA, and ESA for any activity that's taking place using NRCS funding. So even though if for example, if a producer has to do an environmental impact statement, I mentioned that the producer or the partner is responsible for actually carrying that out. NRCS is going to have to sign off on it. So that's what I mean by inherently governmental. We may not be doing all the work for an EIS or an environmental assessment,
but we do have to sign off on it, and that's what makes it inherently governmental. Russell, I saw one question that you may be studiously avoiding, but it's a good one, so I'm going to tackle it here. It's a question about getting into details about the FA-TA split that I mentioned. You'll see in the funding announcements, we have 70% of each project dedicated to FA, financial assistance, and then we have the TA split up into these different buckets. And the question is, why did we do that? Because it's not in the statute and it's not in the RCPP interim rule. And the answer to that, I think we talked about this back in the RCPP Classic days, but what we found under the first iteration of RCPP is that most of the challenges, the majority of the challenges that our partners faced and that our NRCS colleagues faced in managing these projects were around technical assistance and the provision of technical assistance and who was going to get how much and for what. And because of that, we decided to create this structure. It's just strictly based on policy with these different categories of technical assistance and how much is available to partners and how much is available to NRCS. Of course, it's a little bit different under AFAs where we're expecting all of the TA to be moved to partners and just 5% retained by NRCS. But it's really an effort to be more transparent and more clear with our partners, and so that these projects can more seamlessly be carried out with a little bit of structure behind it. So, Russell, if you find one more good question that we can take, we're just about out of time. If we didn't get to your question, check back with us. You can either email us or wait for the FAQ to come out because we have more questions than I have time here today. So, Russell, one more question.
Sure. Okay, for the last question, does the applicant become responsible for compliance to the lifetime of the practice, potentially 10 years or more?
Well, that's a good question. Often for NRCS practices, the lifespan of a practice could exceed the life of an RCPP project. I think that's one of those policy issues we're going to have to do a little bit more digging on, is what, we certainly have this relationship with the lead partner for the 5 years of the project. In this AFA case where the partner is entirely responsible for the FA and TA of these projects, what happens, if a practice is supposed to be maintained beyond the life of the project is a good question and something that we'll need to do a little bit more homework on. So stay tuned for that in the FAQs. And with that, Russell, I want to thank you very much for moderating. I want to thank everyone for joining today. Again, we're really excited to see what you guys come up with. We don't have a program without our partners out there thinking about really interesting ideas and submitting them to us. So look forward to seeing what you come up with. Stay tuned for more information. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our high-level moderator. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you. That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.